Greetings, class. In this installment, we're going to discuss how does gender influence conflict. And there's going to be a couple parts of this that overlap with some of the other questions. Gender relates to our power dynamics, and in another question we ask, how does power influence conflict? And gender will also relate to our ideas about expectations about others and social roles. In addition to these two different details, we're also going to cover the third part, which is that sometimes gender is the conflict. So first, gender and power. There's an interesting way that power influences conflict. Again, the person who has the power might not realize that power is a feature of or a significant component in the disputes. It's frequently the person who doesn't have the power that it becomes aware or realizes that there is a challenge or an obstacle that they're facing. And so one of the ways that we have as a society constructed gender relations tends to privilege males over females. So gender, just from this feature alone, can feature in conflict with a power differential that's based upon sex roles and gender. The way this plays out is that we see any number of details from like the workplace dispute over the same amount of work not receiving equal pay, right? Economic trends show that, for example, in many industries, men make more than women doing the same work. And one of the causal explanations for this is that men are more willing to take risks and, by extension, also more willing to ask for raises. Many workplaces will not give somebody a raise when they don't have to. And that in order to not lose an employee, sometimes, somebody asking for a raise, that they'll get it. But again, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The people who ask for the raises are more likely to get them. And those who feel comfortable with doing that tend to be represented, right, in our contexts. Right, the stereotypical male is more assertive, where the stereotypical women is more passive, right, as a kind of societal construct. So men are expected to do those things. Women asking for raises might actually make them look like they're pushy or in some way pejorative. But again, so this expectation that the same behavior would be perceived differently based upon the social expectations is the next part, right? So our expectations, when we think that another party should act a certain way, then we judge them based upon those expectations. This can influence our ideas about satisfaction in terms of the substantive concerns, like I used the example of a raise. Right? That's the material component of your labor, is what are you being compensated for with it? There's an emotional component as well, right? How do you feel about the work you're doing? How do you feel about the respect you're receiving? Do you feel like you're being treated as an equal? Right? Are you finding meaning? All of those things. And then there's the procedural component, right? Are you engaging in the workplace in a way that you feel good about it? Do you feel connected to the work? Do you feel like you're being included? And so gender can influence all three of those dynamics, not just workplace, but in a community, in any number of contextual settings. What we see is that people tend to subscribe to these standards where men are perceived as being better equipped or prepared for leadership positions, or conversely, that women would be better for the secretarial work, right? So that, again, that's not just a power differential, that leadership versus assistant role, but actually the expectations and the skills that are involved with that. I know when I was growing up, it was like math and science were the subjects that teachers frequently expected the male students to be good at, where like for the reading and writing, right, it's the storytelling, that was what the female students were given credit for. So again, playing to those strengths or playing to those weaknesses translates, right, in terms of expectations. If you think somebody's going to be good at something and then they disappoint you, that can create a conflict. If you think somebody's going to be bad at something and then they perform better than expectations, right, then that can also have an impact on conflict. Gender roles may, in fact, give people, in some cases, strategic avenues for success, right? By being seen as more maternal or more nurturing in a conflict that involves some of those dynamics, by playing to those expectations, a woman might be able to do better, as opposed to in those contexts where those behaviors are expected. Trying to use a more confrontational leadership strategy might not work as well. Conversely, if those are the expectations, the man might end up doing better if he conforms to societal expectations. This could take place, across cultures, across ethnicities, and so forth. But again, people get disappointed when people don't act according to their expectations, whether or not those expectations are well-formed, documented, or even shared. Somebody might be disappointed in you, and you're left guessing with why. Conversely, people frequently do, make assumptions about behaviors as being interpreted as having been sexist or racist or something else. So a person's experience of sexism, which could start a conflict, is a subjective experience in which the person who is being accused of being sexist may have done the things, but may not have felt like it was sexist to do so, or that they were doing so for sexist reasons. Again, so there's a lot to tease out there. And the last part, is by extension, sometimes people have conflicts over the dispute of, were you being pejorative towards a superficial difference, right? Like treating a woman in a way that makes her feel like she's being dismissed based upon her gender. Or the same thing could happen for a man, that certain professions, right? They have these historical gaps and divides. I know one of my good friends who's a nurse, and he's experienced in his career multiple engagements of discrimination about what his motivations were, or did he become a nurse because he wasn't good enough to become a doctor, right? Because it's the expectation that doctor is here and nurse is lesser than, and that the man should be the doctor and the woman should be the nurse. Now, that's not something that's right. I'm not saying that I agree with that, but when you engage with a person who operates on these assumptions, that confrontation of that expectation creates conflict. Now, the friend who's in this position, he actually enjoys those conflicts because he likes to be able to kind of break down some of the superficial animus that's created in some of our sexist behaviors and expectations. But some people don't like to engage in the conflicts. When somebody showcases an expectation, they just experience the disappointment that is accompanied by prejudice, that they're being judged based upon stuff that's external to them and for reasons that don't make sense to them. So, again, Sometimes it is the ism that's involved, right? And the ism can be directly involved when we're dealing with questions of gender. If you're making determinations in a conflict that are based upon something like gender, you really need to stop and ask the question, is gender important? If it's important, why is it important? If it's not important, why is it being brought up? Sometimes you have to shed light on those obstacles or potential obstacles before you can address them. If somebody feels like something's happening in a way that's prejudicial, sometimes you have to get past that prejudice. And this could be for any number of reasons. But if you don't get past that prejudice, you might not be able to establish trust. And without trust, you might not be able to reach an agreement that is mutually satisfying. So gender can be involved in conflict for at least this many reasons and in this many ways. We'll follow up with another question in the next one. See you then.